I want to begin a sermon series that I'm beginning this weekend, and hopefully it's going to run for about 3 weeks. And I hope you find it quite useful for your spiritual journey. And that spiritual journey is to grow to us closer to Jesus. And I'd like to begin by saying that there's one fact about in life, and this is an undisputable, or is it indisputable, an undeniable truth. And what is that? That everyone suffers. And I'm not talking this evening about physical suffering. That's part of it. But I'm talking about a kind of suffering that is much deeper than physical suffering. So I'm referring here to interior distress, woundedness from inside, and the after effect of that woundedness. And what are these after effects? Just to mention but a few. Anxiety. And what is anxiety? Always thinking of the worst possible scenario in every situation and fearing something that probably will never happen. And yet, you can't seem to get control over it. You just find yourself all the time anxious. Or the feeling of loneliness. Even when you're married, you still feel that. Even in a crowd, sometimes you feel lonely and alone. Sometimes we even feel lonely in the presence of God. We feel He's abandoned us. Or the feeling of anger. Sometimes you just find yourself incapable of controlling your emotions. That sometimes your emotions get better of you. And every time it happens, you say, not again. Here it goes again. And then it happens again. Or the feeling of sadness, which is much deeper. Or just that emptiness or unhappiness. These are some signs, just to mention but a few, signs of interior distress that I want to talk about tonight, and hopefully I'll be talking about in the next 3 weekends, God willing. Now, why do we have to deal with all of this? Why is it that we can't just seem to get fulfillment in life? Why is it that the goalpost always moves? Why is it that I'm always anxious? Why is it that I feel lonely and lost sometimes? Why do I feel a sense of not being loved sometimes? Why do we have to suffer this way? Why do we all go through some form of interior distress or woundedness from the inside? The answer is very simple. And this comes from psychology, of course, but biblical psychology, which says that whenever someone falls short at loving you or loving me, it leaves me with a wound. I give an example. A child who is growing and desires the love of the mother, and something happens, either through an act of the mother or just complete ignorance, the child doesn't feel loved at a particular time. That can grow, and we call that trauma sometimes, grow into small T's or big traumas in the life of this child, that as he grows or she grows up into adulthood, starts to show in other ways. So every time someone has the opportunity to love us, or every time we trust someone to love us, we trust, because you got to trust, right? And they disappoint us. Every of those times, psychologically, leaves a wound in us. Now, what is the problem with this wound? Now, this is where the problem is. Unfortunately, in life, we all have lenses. Whether you have physical lenses that you wear, but there's a set of lenses that is deeper than physical lenses. That is the interior lenses. What is the interior lens? Is the lenses through which you see the world? Is the lenses through which you interpret whatever happens to you? This is why two people can experience the same event, and the two of them report the event, or the event has two separate impressions on those two people. And you almost feel like, was it not the same event? Someone looks at it, one of them looks at it, and it's complete positivity from it. The other person looks at it, and it's complete negativity from it. Why is one person negative and the other one positive when they have both encountered the same situation? You know why? The reason is very simple. Remember, we talked about woundedness. Our woundedness are the lenses through which we look at the world. So we interpret things that happens to us in life from our past wounds. And if you've been wounded in your past, you will never trust, even when someone is to be trusted. If you've been wounded in your past, you've been betrayed in your past, you will not ever want to give your life, submit your will to someone else because of your past experience. Because we look, again, I know I'm repeating myself, but there's a reason why I am. Because we look at the events of life and we interpret the events of life from our woundedness. Remember where the woundedness comes from. Every time we don't feel loved, every time we trust someone and they betray our trust, they leave us with a deep wound from which, and through that wound, if we don't heal, we interpret everything that happens to us. And I give an example. You see people deal with a feeling of inadequacy. You see people, they are socially awkward sometimes, and they are so unsure of themselves when they're in a crowd. Where did that come from? It came from a feeling of inadequacy. Where did that feeling of inadequacy? Is there anyone in the group, in the crowd there, that makes them feel that way or saying something to them? Meanwhile, nothing has been said to them, but they feel inadequate. Nobody has told them that they are inadequate, but they have that feeling inside of them. Why? Because there's a woundedness in their past that makes them look at themselves as not worthy of being loved. Another example, a very good example, is the fear of losing something that is precious to you. And I see this all the time, especially from mothers. Sometimes they interpret it to mean love. You hold on to your children like the lives and the safety of your children depend on you. Yes, some part of it depends on you. But when those children grow up, they're adults and they've got to make their own decisions. And ultimately, their safety depends on God. But what do you see oftentimes? We hold on to these children that sometimes we don't even allow them to grow, right? We so shelter them that they can't even leave home. And where is that coming from? Because mom has insecurities that she's dealing with. So her kids are the ones that give her security. So if those children leave home, mom feels exposed. Where does that feeling come from? From her woundedness. And now from that woundedness, she interprets everything, that everything she loves, she's going to lose it. Maybe she lost her dad when she was young, or she lost a friend when she was young, when she was 8. And now she lives in a world that says anything that I love will be taken away from me. And what does that make them do? From that insecurity, then they hold on to things in a way that they shouldn't, almost deifying things and giving a place of premium to things that only God should enjoy. I want to say to you tonight that you are in good company. And what do I mean by you're in good company? Woundedness of life. Everyone suffers from this, including myself. I've got my own wounds too. And I interpret every time. There are times that I misinterpret people's intentions. Why? Because I'm interpreting their intentions from my own woundedness. But the good news tonight I want to share with you is, even Mama Mary had her own wounds too. You know, one of the titles that Mama Mary is given is Our Lady of Sorrows. She knew sorrows. The only difference is her woundedness did not come, or her suffering, interior suffering, did not come from her traumas or her woundedness. Could you imagine a woman who just only after 8 days of having a baby, and you will have to travel with that baby on a donkey for hundreds of kilometers to flee to another country because someone was after the life of a child? What can be more traumatic to a mother like what Mama Mary went through? And then she comes back, what happens? She watches the child on the cross, the only child she has. And even before that, She wakes up one day and she looks around, the child wasn't there. He's lost. Imagine the stress she went through. And in her mind, she's saying, God gave me one child to look after, the Son of God, and I lose him? And she lost it. And I like the way, when she found him in the temple, look at, even from the way she talked to Jesus, she was stressed. She said, child, why would you do this to us? You want to kill me and your dad? Why would you do this to us? From the question she asked Jesus, you could tell that she was stressed. She had her interior distress. It's not only you. And what about her just sitting at the foot of the cross and watch people mock her son, call him all kinds of names, and then he was crucified? We're in good company. And that's why we go to her with our intercession, because she understands. But even Jesus had his interior distress. So everyone suffers. Isaiah calls him a man of sorrows. That's the way Prophet Isaiah refers to Jesus. He said, when the Messiah comes, he's going to be a man of sorrows. 2 weeks ago, I think, 2 Sundays ago, we read, I think it was 2 Sundays ago, I can't remember now, we read about Jesus looking at Jerusalem. And what does he do? He weeps. Well, he couldn't be weeping for something good. Why was he weeping? Because he looked at them and saw how disobedient they were. They would just not follow the path. And they were following the path that leads to destruction. And for those of you who are parents, you've been in these shoes several times, especially when you are dealing with adult children and they are making poor choices. It breaks your heart. Yet you can't control their choices. That's how Jesus felt. He watched all of these Israelites just wanting to go their own way. And he knew what was going to come out of that. And what does he do? He looks at Jerusalem, he shakes his head, and he weeps over it. What is that weeping? Interior distress. Then imagine what he went through on the cross. The day before he was to die, we're told that he was in so much agony. Why was he in so much agony? Because he was God, he could see what was going to happen the next day. And he knew it was going to be painful. And in distress, Scripture said he felt like God had abandoned him. And he cried to his father, can you just not take this cup away from me? And the father said, no, I can't. Because I love you, but I love all these others too. So you need to drink this cup so that I can gain all these others back. Then imagine what he went through the next day. And I say all this to you this evening to remind you that everyone suffers. You're in good company. And very often we get fooled to think that every other person's life is better than ours. You come to the church, you watch the family that sits in front of you, they all sit together, all 8 of them, well-dressed, well-mannered. They kneel exactly the time when everyone should kneel. They stand and you look at them from the back, you're so distracted. How come my family cannot just be like this family? But the truth is, we all dress up because everyone suffers. There are days that I stand here on a Sunday and I'm preaching to you and I am in distress, but I do a good job of hiding it. And that's the next thing I want to talk about. In my job as a priest, one of the things I do is to journey with people through their distress. Either they lost someone, or loss of job, or loss of marriage, or some loss in their lives. And even as a counselor, this is what I do all the time, every week, that I'm journeying with people through their pain, their woundedness. And I'm reminded, because sometimes I get an email from someone, and he says, Father, can I see you? And I said, okay, I'm free next week. I don't know what's coming up. And then they come in, and this is a parishioner I see, and I'm saying, oh, they have it all together. And she comes and spends the next 1 or 2 hours. And when she leaves me, I am deflected. I said, I look at this woman every day in church. I said, she has it all together. I didn't know she's broken. And then I'm reminded, everyone suffers. Now, how do we deal with this interior woundedness? This is what I want to talk about tonight. We all suffer. We're all putting up a show. And you know what I'm talking about. Some of you probably don't even want to be here tonight because of how crappy your week was. You just don't want to be here. Even some of you, as I'm talking now, you can't even hear me because your plate is so full, right? And you're just wondering, how am I going to get through next week again? How am I going to pay these bills? And they just keep coming. Whether you make money or not, the bills keep coming. So how do we deal with this interior distress that we all go through? Amazingly, let me not use that word. Interestingly, we all deal with this interior distress in the same way. How do we deal with it? We pretend. We put up a face. This is why we spend so much time in front of a mirror. You know how much time you spend in front of a mirror in a day? You know how many places in our days that you have mirror? Look at how many mirrors you have in a car. And just check women when they're driving. This is why they never see you when you're standing. They're almost running into you. Michelle, for example, almost driving into you because they are checking their hair. I said to them, the mirror is for you to look at the car behind you, not to arrange your hair. But it's not only women that do that. This is why we spend time. This is why we even spend so much money on special toothpaste that will whiten our teeth, because we got to smile and look like everything is together. And if you think you're the only one that pretends, oh no, even the priest does. Even the bishop does. I'm sure Pope Francis does. We all pretend. And how do we pretend? We wear a mask. We wear a mask. And I like the way there's this popular Catholic American philosopher. The word he uses for that, he says, the way we deal with our interior distress, the word he uses, he says, we put on what he calls a universal cover up. We're all covering up. We are all covering up. I'm reminded of a story of a family. And I read this story just about a week ago in a book. The author was telling the story of his own family. And he says he was trying to, he had 6 kids to prepare them for Mass. You know how hard that is, those of you who are parents. And this was Christmas Eve. And they lived in a big town, and traffic was going to take them 45 minutes to get to church. And church, of course, Christmas Eve, is packed, right? And so they need to get, out the door. And Dad is trying to get everyone going. And they were running late already. And he said, just as he was trying to get the first kid into the vehicle, load the first kid in, by the way, they have 6. He says, his wife turned to him and said, honey, I think we should just take the family picture today. And he said, he looked at, are you out of your mind? We're running late for Mass. No, let's take it. And he just said to himself, I'm not going to have this fight because there's not going to be an end to it. So he just gave in. And he said, they arranged themselves to have pictures, and they saw someone passing and said, can you just take us a picture? They took the first picture. And he said, okay, let's start loading now. And they looked at the picture. One of the kids did his face like this. Oh, they had to take another one. They went through 4-5 times taking the picture before they got a perfect picture. And then finally loaded the kids in the vehicle, got to church. They were late. They couldn't sit in the main church. They were sitting in the hall. And he said as he was driving home, just before he got into his car, he turned on his phone and he saw a message had dropped on Facebook. And what was it? His wife had posted the picture of this perfect family. And he said, you would believe the comments. Everyone saying, what a lovely family. And he said to himself, if only they know the chaos within which we took this picture, they will know it's not a perfect family. But why do we cover up? Why do we pretend like there's nothing wrong? Maybe you don't know why, but I want to share that with you tonight. Because sometimes things become habitual that we don't even know why we do it. And I want to share that with you. Number one reason why we cover up, like everything is okay. Everything is, and you ask people, how are you doing? Listen to the quick response. Fine. I'm good. You hear that all the time, especially from men. I'm good. And the quicker you hear it, the more you know it's not telling you the truth. It's not good. It's suffering inside. Number one reason why we all pretend is because of ignorance. What do I mean by this? We have grown accustomed to the chaos of our lives that we don't even know what normal looks like anymore. This is unfortunate. That when someone actually shows us what happiness is, we don't recognize it. Do you know why? Because one of the consequences of the fall, I'm talking about when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, one of the consequences of that was they became intellectually weakened, so much so that they could not tell good from evil anymore. And because of that, we suffer that consequence that we get so used to the chaos of our lives. How often are you trying to tell someone to trim down their schedule? You're doing too much. And they say, no, and they're still adding to it because they don't even know what doing too much looks like. Chaos becomes part of your life. The other reason why we all cover up is we feel helpless. Okay, so Father, if I decide to not cover up and face my distress, I can't do anything about it. So the best thing is, I'm just going to pretend that nothing is wrong. I'm all okay. And yet, you weeping inside on a daily basis. The other reason why we all cover up is the fear of being judged. There is a natural desire in us, and it is in our DNA. And when I say something is in our DNA, spiritually, I'm saying that's how God created us. God created us for company. God did not create us to be alone. That's why He sent us into a family. So there is a desire inside us to be loved by people. We want to be approved by, we seek people's approval. We want to be accepted. We want to be loved. And that desire to be loved makes us to cover up our past because we live in the fear that if people find out what our wounds are, they're not going to love us anymore. And it's even worse in the church. I say worse because the church is hopefully he becomes a saint. Pope Francis calls it a hospital. And that is what it is. We come here with all our messiness to Jesus who can heal us. And that's what the sacraments do, right? You go to confession, it heals you of your hurt and of your wounds, and you receive forgiveness and mercy from God. And that's why you come, and rightly so. But if you keep coming to church and you're receiving the sacraments and your life is still the same, what happens over time is you give up on yourself. You become impatient. And you say, wow, this is never going to work. And I'm actually embarrassed now because everyone knows I am so active in my church and I'm still dealing with some habitual sin. And so what do? You hide those habitual sins from people so that they don't know you struggle. It's the same with a priest. How often do you hear a priest preach and they tell you of their woundedness? Why do you think priests don't like to share their woundedness? Fear of being judged. Because if I come and tell you, it took me a lot of courage when I started talking about my own story. And at the beginning, people judged me. Because people are going to say, what kind of a priest is he? You mean he deals with sin too? So what does the priest do? He talks down on you people and make you feel like you're all sinners and it's okay. But he's only pretending. And why is he pretending? Because he doesn't want to be judged. The other reason why we cover up is the fear of change. Again, that's attached to the first reason that I gave. We've grown so used to this chaos that we almost can't imagine life without it. If God were to take that chaos out of our lives, then there's going to be a vacuum. And so what do? We don't want to look at it, so that in looking at it, there's no need for us to change. And when I talk about the chaos or the habits that we need to give up, I'm not saying we are bad people. I'm not saying we just desire to do bad stuff. But the reality of our woundedness is there's always a need, just like any kind of wound you have, there's a need to always react to it. And how do we cope with our woundedness? We choose wrong coping skills. And I can give you examples. Someone who suffers from anxiety, it's a coping mechanism. You're trying to cope from fear of losing something. And what do? Well, you're not coping well. And then your fear is, if I face this woundedness in my life, then I'm forced to change, and they take away my desire to control the situation, then that's just going to expose me So how am I going to deal with my wounds? And so what do? We pretend. And you have clear examples of that. And people begin to believe that this is who they are. This is my personality. Haven't you heard people say things like, I just love sarcasm? Oh yeah, I just love sarcasm, they say. No, you don't. And they say, oh, well, that's who I am. He gives just dry jokes, and he picks on people, and he puts people down with his dry jokes. And when you ask him, he says, well, that's just who I am. No. It's a coping mechanism, and a negative one. That's not who you are. Or you see, especially very common with mothers, you just worry forever. Women just worry for no reason. You take something, anyway, they're going to worry anyway. When they walk into the sacristy and I say, how are you doing? And they tell me what they are worrying about, I just walk away because I know that next week is going to be another thing. We just get used to it, right? And then when you say, oh yeah, or you talk to someone who has OCD. And he says, oh no, I don't have OCD. I have a parishioner. Thank God she's not here tonight. I always pull her legs. Oh yeah, you don't have OCD. Julie, of course, you know. Oh, you don't have OCD. Yeah, Father, I don't have OCD. I just like things done properly. Oh, come on. You have OCD. And then we think that is who we are. And because we now believe that that is who we are afraid that if we give up that particular habit, then we're giving up a part of ourselves. Now, I want to end this long homily because I said it's in 3 series. Remember how we started tonight. And why am I talking about everyone suffering? Because we see the story of a woman today in today's gospel reading, the widow. She could have hidden herself. She could have come into the temple and not give anything because she has nothing. Or she could have borrowed to give in order to cover who she is. But and you notice what was Jesus doing in the temple? His eyes were on everyone because he came so that we don't hide from him. The devil wants us to run away from God, and only God can fix us. So I want to say to you that the danger about getting used to cover up is we also cover up from God. This is the saddest part of it. We cover up from God. We hide our woundedness from him. We hide our brokenness away from God. And yet God wants to see our brokenness so that he can do something about it. But I want to leave you with a question tonight. And this is the question. Why do we have the desire to hide from God? Why are you hiding your woundedness from God? And I think the simple answer is because we mistrust God. And it's very easy to say, Jesus, I trust you. I trust you. But when you see your anxiety, you know you don't trust. And so I want to say to you that next week, the second part of my homily, I want to look at the reasons why we mistrust God. That's what we'll be talking about next week. Why do we mistrust him? That's what we'll talk about next week. And then the following week, what can we do about it? Because only when we can work on that, begin to trust Jesus, then we can bring our woundedness to him. Because only him can restore us back to the way God created us in Genesis chapter 1.